Welcome to the Gen AI Daily Briefing for Tuesday, August 18th, 2026. The clearest signal today is that the frontier model market is no longer just growing. It is concentrating at extraordinary speed. Anthropic is reportedly at a $65 billion annualized revenue run rate, after adding $18 billion in just 2 months. Even if you haircut the headline because annualized run rates can exaggerate short-term ramps, the directional point is hard to miss. We are now looking at a market where a very small number of labs have crossed from promising software platform into something that behaves more like hyperscale infrastructure with a model layer attached. For engineering leaders, the practical implication is that procurement gravity is shifting. Large buyers increasingly want fewer vendors, deeper guarantees, longer context windows, stronger eval packages, and direct support for agentic workflows. That favors the vendors with enough capital to subsidize serving, enough research depth to keep model quality moving, and enough enterprise packaging to make risk committees comfortable. It also raises a harder question for everyone else. If you're not a top 3 model provider, do you differentiate with workflow, routing, safety, vertical data, or cost? Pure model access is becoming a thinner wedge. Next up, a deal that fits that exact thesis. Stripe is reportedly acquiring OpenRouter for more than $7 billion. If that closes anywhere near the rumored price, it says the control plane for AI API traffic is graduating from useful middleware into strategic infrastructure. OpenRouter's value is never just many models behind one endpoint. The real value is normalized access, dynamic routing, fallback behavior, billing abstraction, and a place to sit between application demand and volatile model supply. That matters because the market is discovering that multi-model is not a philosophical preference. It is an operational necessity. Teams want latency-aware routing, budget-aware routing, sovereign options, and resilience when one provider degrades or changes pricing. Stripe buying that layer would be a classic move. On the transaction fabric, not just the checkout button. And there's a second-order effect. If the payments company becomes the broker of model traffic, it gets a privileged view into usage patterns across the AI economy. That is strategically powerful data. On the infrastructure side, Groq raised $350 million as it leans further into a neocloud model. This is one of the more revealing pivots in AI infrastructure. Groq built its brand on differentiated chips and deterministic low-latency inference. But the market has been telling everyone the same thing for a year. Customers often do not want components. They want capacity. They want throughput, predictable latency, uptime, and procurement simplicity. If that means mixing proprietary silicon with Nvidia-heavy deployments, so be it. In plain terms, inference is becoming a service business before it becomes a hardware margin business for many startups. That does not mean custom silicon is dead. It means distribution, fleet management, and customer contracts are arriving before the grand hardware replacement thesis. Expect more chip companies to look suspiciously like cloud providers over the next 18 months. Related to that, Nvidia is investing $1.5 billion in a SoftBank data center developer tied to an OpenAI project. This is another reminder that AI advantage is now physically embodied. It lives in transformers and data flywheels. Yes, but also in transmission queues, cooling loops, land rights, and long-term power contracts. Nvidia is not just selling accelerators. It is placing strategic bets to make sure its chips are wired into the next generation of dedicated AI campuses. The important market color here is that capital formation in AI infrastructure is getting vertically coordinated. Model labs, cloud operators, chip vendors, developers, and energy counterparties are getting locked together earlier. For enterprise buyers, that likely means better supply assurance at the top end and less flexibility lower down. For startups, it means the barrier to competing on raw infrastructure keeps climbing. Worth flagging from the engineering trenches. Hugging Face published a blog post claiming 33 points more cluster utilization on the same hardware, with the main change being job ordering. This is exactly the kind of non-glamorous optimization that matters right now. We have spent 2 years talking about bigger clusters, but a lot of organizations are still leaving material efficiency on the table in scheduling, packing, and workload sequencing. The key idea is simple. Cluster throughput is not just a function of hardware quantity or interconnect quality. It is also a function of how training jobs with different shapes, durations, and communication patterns are placed over time. Poor ordering creates fragmentation and idle pockets that don't show up in board decks, but absolutely show up in cloud bills. If these gains hold broadly, the takeaway is that infra teams should treat schedulers and orchestration policy as first-class optimization surfaces, not back-office plumbing. On the research side, one of the more substantive robotics papers in the batch is Batten, which targets long-horizon robot manipulation. The setup is increasingly familiar. Vision language action models can perform individual contact-rich skills reasonably well, but chaining many subtasks together still breaks because errors compound and one stage quietly constrains the next. Batten's answer is to freeze the VLA, put an LLM-style agent in charge of planning and adaptation, use analytic motion primitives for free space movement, and invoke the VLA selectively for the hard contact segments. The new wrinkle is transition-aware memory, plus explicit subtask exploration. That architecture makes sense. A lot of robotic failure isn't the grasp policy is bad. It's the system failed to preserve enough state about why the previous grasp changed the next reachable action. In other words, long horizon success is a memory and handoff problem as much as a policy problem. This paper is another data point that modularity is winning in embodied systems. Language planning, classic control where it works, learn policies where they're strongest, and memory designed around task transitions rather than generic chat history. Another paper to watch is Proteus on long context sequence modeling. Its argument is that memory models often expose too much capacity too early, allowing initial tokens to overoccupy the state and pollute memory that should be reserved for later, more relevant context. Proteus proposes incremental memory activation, effectively growing usable memory as the sequence progresses. That is a neat framing because it attacks a real pathology in compressed state alternatives to full attention. Long context systems are not only battling quadratic cost, they are battling state allocation. If early context grabs too many degrees of freedom, later information has to fight interference. Architects working on retrieval, agent memory, or streaming models should pay attention to this. The deeper lesson is that memory isn't just about what you store, but when capacity becomes writable. Finally, a safety and governance paper with immediate product relevance. An audit of activation probes and guard models for compliance detection argues many systems exhibit what the authors call rule blindness. In their tests, changing, deleting, or permuting the stated governing rule often did not materially affect detector accuracy. That suggests the models were not actually reading the policy in a meaningful way. They were inferring likely violations from scenario surface cues. If that finding generalizes, it is a serious warning for anyone building compliance wrappers around foundation models. A detector that keys off vibes rather than the actual rule text may look fine in dashboards and fail in audit. This is especially important in regulated domains where firms are trying to operationalize legal or internal policy controls through LLM guards. The hard problem is not just detecting unsafe outputs. It is demonstrating that the detector's reasoning is anchored to the operative rule set. What to watch from here? First, whether the Stripe OpenRouter story catalyzes a land grab for AI control plane assets. Second, whether infra financing keeps tightening the triangle between Nvidia, Model Labs, and power-backed data center builds. And third, whether the next wave of technical progress comes less from giant model jumps and more from systems work around memory, orchestration, and modular agents in the physical world. That's your briefing. We'll see you tomorrow.